And thank you. Firstly, just a quick acknowledgement of the Garigal people of the Guringai lands, which I'm coming from today. Let me get my screen sharing going. And I'm going to do a whole screen because I'll probably be jumping around to Windows and starting with my Pebble phone. Look, there's Makeover Monday from 2018. There's a little segue in. And I just need to get to the button that's hiding behind the Zoom buttons. There we go. Thank you. So as mentioned, David Tanner, Sydney Tableau User Group co-lead, currently working in banking in Sydney, Australia. What am I going to be talking about today? As mentioned, the REST API, my tips for getting started, particularly when you don't have any programming experience. The REST API, the documentation out there on the web, it's, I'll say, all aimed at programmers and people who've had experience in those areas. And it's really much simpler than that. It's been made really easy with a lot of tools available. Some quick use cases that you might think of, might use, workflow integrations. People might have custom backup scenarios, upgrade testing, which I'll certainly be talking about today, setting permissions. Also seeing cases where people might have a data source and they're actually like, oh, for whatever particular reason, I have a need that I want to publish this data source 50 times with a slightly different data source filter. Well, the REST API is a great way of doing that. So you're not doing that and changing it over and over again and boring yourself to death in Tableau Desktop. REST API and a little bit of code, make it nice and easy. I'm going to dive in. So firstly, always be safe with what you're doing with your code. Let me move some videos out of the way. In general, all the language and commands is pretty obvious, so you're going to not really get into trouble. If you're going to delete something, it'll actually probably have the word delete in there. And if you want to overwrite something, it'll be an option which actually says overwrite. So generally, if you're playing around and doing things, you're not going to do anything or delete any content unintentionally. So a very safe environment. Couple call outs though, there are lots of stuff that's been added to Tableau, which doesn't necessarily exist in the API or hasn't necessarily been updated in the API. I'll quick call out one that I found is permissions on projects. You can totally do things with workbooks, data sources, and the project level permissions, but the newer features like metrics and flows, which you can see there in the GUI, they haven't been added into that REST API yet. And occasionally there's some really esoteric bugs like you can actually see a permission called project leader denied, which doesn't actually exist in Tableau. Lots of information out there on the community. As you know, the community is what makes a lot of this happen. And passwords, get into a really good habit of never putting your password into code, never ever. And I'm going to click across. Have a technique that I use that kind of makes that really easy, which is in Windows, you can simply use this thing called keyring. I will go into this, that it is as simple as these couple of lines of code, that you'll store your username and your password in this Windows system. And you'll basically, whenever in your code it says, I want a username or I want a password, you just put in this little bit of, just cut and paste this other bit of code and that'll automatically get your password from the system where you've saved it. I'll jump over and show that one right now. Actually, I'm doing things out of order as I love to do. Just having an issue. I'd never remember how to hide the, there we go, now I've hidden that bar. You can simply, when you install this bit of program, which I've got in the next slide, love doing things out of order, you'll say you'll import that, as I mentioned, is keyring, which will store your password. You'll simply run this command, set password, that you want to, in this case, I'm setting my username. Then I'll call it again where I want to set my password, both of these for Tableau. I've just called them tab user and tab pass. In this case, you can see I'm getting my example of tab user, which I've just called my tab admin in my simple little setup environment here. And so we'll see that used throughout some examples later on. Now we'll go a little bit back in time to getting set up. What I'm using today is mainly called Jupyter Notebooks. There's many ways of getting those. The simplest and easiest way is to get a package called Anaconda. And that is basically an environment of Python and Anaconda that just once you've installed it, you're up and running. Very, very simple. And here, so you see, this is the Anaconda environment. I literally just ran through the standard install, and then I normally launch this section called Jupyter Notebooks. And when it launches, it simply opens up in your browser as this homepage, and then you can get started. Now, as mentioned in my slides, there'll be a link to all my code samples. You can download those, and they'll be available as things like initial setup, my first Tableau Python, or you can simply hit new. Here's this one called Python 3. It will open up a new window where you can start typing in these bits of code, and I'll just start working and have you running. Easy links to all this slide deck and all the code files will be available. I'll be posting them on Tableau Public for this slide deck and Tableau Community for the files. And go to either one of those and there's a link to the other one. So what are we going to do when we first run our Tableau? So we want to log in and then we want to get a list of content. Let's see how easy that can be. Save me some typing. I will go to where I've saved my example. The first thing it will do is it'll run a few lines of modules that are made available. Now, Tableau Server Client is the big piece of work that other people have done for it. It's actually published on the Tableau GitHub, and it makes life really easy. It means we don't have to do most of that work for ourselves. I've got a second line here where I'm including in my examples, which just means if you're running in an internal company environment and you don't have a certificate that's authorized by the web for your security, you'll quite often get a little warning message. It'll just hide that warning message. In my particular zone, I just have my home environment. I've got just a basic server setup, just running on default site. So default site is blank, tip for new players. Otherwise, your site name can go in here. And we set up our authentication. So as I mentioned, we've got our user and our password. Then we tell it which site we want to log into. And I better start running these. I run them simply by pressing Shift Enter, or you can hit the run button on a particular piece of code. I'll show you that method too. And so now I've basically set myself up to be able to log into Tableau Server. Now that, I'll say those top four are probably the same across every piece of code that I generally do with Tableau. And then we get into what do we actually want to do. So if I go here, I want to view, in this case, every view that I have access to on Tableau Server. I simply run this piece of code that's gotten all the views. And now if I want to print that out, I can just say, hey, print those out for me. Here's a collection of things I've got on the server. Now, I mentioned earlier that a lot of the things on this library is pretty much names and items that you're used to in Tableau. So if I wanted to see all the workbooks I have access to, you can see I've asked this for server.views. I can just change this to server.workbooks. Run that bit, run the next bit, and this is the list of workbooks that code comes from on that Tableau server. Works the same with data sources, even will work for projects. I'll run that, and there's a list of projects. And so if I jump back to one of these, which has, here's my local Tableau server. If I create a new project, create it, make it available. And now I go back to this piece of code and ask it again for my projects. There's my new project, Hi, Tableau Fringe Festival. So that's how simple it can be. And really, I guess that's one of my key takeaways I want to keep driving is you don't need to know extensive bits about a code. There's a little bit of, I'll say, still like an artist, where you take those simple setup things, get them set up, and then you're just tweaking those little bits and pieces in between to understand those next pieces. Now, if we jump way forward in time where you've been using this for a little while, what's something that's really functional and detailed that you can do with it, and that can be quite powerful. And one that I've certainly done is image testing, mainly around when coming to a Tableau upgrade time. And particularly, so I'll say the use case is server full of content. We want to upgrade major versions of Tableau, but we want to understand what's potentially going to change in our views. Has there been other things that have changed? Have we potentially been using something that was previously a bug in Tableau with like maybe hiding pop-ups and so forth that Tableau has fixed, made it a feature, and potentially we might break on our newer version of Tableau. And so this is a way we can learn about those things. And sometimes it could be as little as things as Tableau may have updated how the UI looks, and sometimes the drop-down buttons change slightly or legend might change slightly. They can be insignificant things in some people's minds, but for other people, they can be quite significant. So what we'll do in this case is we'll use Python and these modules and the REST API to essentially download a copy of every view on the workbook, every view on the server, save those to files. Then we could theoretically upgrade our server. We'll do that again, and then we can use some Python code to compare those and highlight where those differences might stand out. And if you've got a server with hundreds, thousands, or even tens of thousands of views on it, you can see how very quickly this goes from something that a human could do if there was a small amount of content to basically not possible for humans to do, and computers can start doing very well for us and just highlight where those changes are that we might want to look at. One of the things I'll also call out is if you happen to be in a world or environment where you have multiple servers, multiple systems, Tableau has some really cool tools that they allow you to connect to 2 servers and do things like that at the same time. Not always in such a fortunate position myself, so I have these tools that I can do it with just a single server. There may also be a use case where it's just your own project and you're doing some other kind of update, and you want to check whether a data update in the background, something like that, is going to have a consequential effect on your dashboard. And this might be a way of automating some of that testing. Anyway, I'll jump over to running those tests. And as before, feel free to drop questions into the Q&A. I always find that my presentations aren't complete until I've had the Q&As and I've added the content from the Q&As back into my slide pack, which is certainly one of my plans, is that content on Tableau Public will keep being updated. So here is that sample code, and this one's got a little bit more commentary in it. You'll see a couple of standard things. So in this case, there's my standard import statements with Tableau and Keyring, a few extra ones because we are going to get it to read and write from the file system. I've got a couple of things saying I want to write to a temp directory. This will set me up. So it would set me up, but clearly I haven't retested, and I know what I did there. I changed my site name to a site ID. I was trying to make my code consistent before the presentation, and I didn't quite get there. And this next bit of code, this is actually going to connect in and just download all those images the simple way. I've got a cool way of doing it down below. You can see there's a lot more code going on, but this is all that you need to do it if you just want to do it one image at a time. I say that, and again, I know what I've done there. I haven't prepared myself properly. In Tableau, there's options. As I said, sometimes you get these options to download things at different resolutions. So I want to set my resolution to high. So I just tell Tableau, yes, I want that high resolution. And right at the moment, it is downloading those images into my temp directory. Image test. Oh, that's my differences folder. Today is the 16th, so you can see I ran a couple of tests yesterday. And here are those particular items downloading and adding in here. And you can see this will stay a star while it's still downloading. I can hear my computer over in the corner getting nice and noisy and the fan spinning up. And we're almost probably done. Not a whole lot of images on there, but you can see they'll just keep downloading. I published a copy of the Tableau Fringe Festival guide to my own server so I can have a quick look at it, have it on hand. And that's now downloaded a copy of every view that I have on that workbook on that server available to myself. Now I would theoretically do that upgrade and do some comparisons. And so do that upgrade, make those changes to that server that I wanted to check the differences on, and I would run this again. So here's one I prepared earlier. Yesterday, I ran it twice, test and test one. Now, I didn't actually upgrade my machine. What I did was I went in here and I just changed the colors of a few items and changed some things. In this case, I broke my legend. And in another case here, I deleted some data out of it, just to show what that would look like if I did that comparison. And I will jump over and do that comparison. Now this is essentially just straight up code, run it as is, adjust your file names and directories as required. In my notes, you'll see that I actually didn't, I'll say, develop the main part of this myself. I'll certainly call out that reference when I go back to my slides. Here's some things to try and make it easier to set up, to get your file names nice and easy. Run through, and I'm skipping over this quite quickly because I'll say it's not necessarily needed to know the details. And you can, as I said, there's documentation, there's ways to learn that further, but obviously 20-minute presentation, let's dive in and see the results. And so here it's compared those files in those two different directories that I've downloaded and told me that there's no change in any of these ones. Here it's detected a change, which is called a 4.74. And here it's the change, which is called 133. Now, the bigger the number, the bigger the change in this case. And it even printed me out one example here. But I can jump over to that file system because I would do bench. Oh, I probably want a copy of those so I can open them up and have a look at them. And so here it is. Now it is black and white. The way the code works is to compare black and white versions of the images. Obviously has that grayscale, so it can pick up the color differentiation. So this one with my small change, and you can see that legend is different. And if I go to the next image, this has a bigger change. And in this case, I went into the second copy and deleted this, and you can quite quickly see that standout of changes and some of those differences that can come up. So I've found this very handy for when doing upgrades to get confidence in knowing what is changing, what is breaking. Are there particular areas of content that may or may not need extra assistance during an upgrade process? Or are we going to be all good and very happy? Let's roll out that new Tableau software version. Let me jump back to my slides and see what things I've managed to skip over doing that. So as mentioned, credit to this particular web page, which had that comparing Python to images. And that's certainly where I got this main piece of code, which actually does that comparison. It also has a nice long write-up if you want to know all the technical details about how it actually works. Some things that I've discovered from this in recent upgrades is Tableau's made some UI changes where one of the things was the drop-down arrows became more centered. So we had lots of dashboards that flagged up with very small changes because those drop-down arrows moved slightly. And there was some minor changes to the way that the text aligned with the color box in Legends. So it was very handy for going, oh, yep, no, that makes sense. We know what's going on there. And then occasionally highlighting some other dashboards where people may have used show hide tricks that were no longer available. Again, I also see here I've called out what any particular file names. They'll all be available on the Tableau public and Tableau community sites. Very happy for feedback and other information. Dive through that super quickly. But I really wanted to point out that that initial setup and that initial, hey, what can my account do? What can I see with my account? Doesn't require no special permissions. The closest thing we get to a special software is downloading that free environment of Anaconda, which has Python and Jupyter, and then just running some very small bits of code, which I'll say aren't complicated, hopefully aren't scary, are safe to run. And you can see that certainly as you get more advanced, you can start delving into things that might, stress your Tableau environment. Downloading images is one of those things that can stress a Tableau environment. And that cool method of way can actually, you really tune it up. You can make your environment work very hard.